What was your relationship with Hogan at the time? And what was he like?
When I met Hogan, we were in Pensacola in about 78, 77, or 78. David Schultz and I were there together. That was the first time that we had gone down to Pensacola together. And Louis Tillett was the booker in Tampa and brought Hogan up to Pensacola because Mike Graham and those guys in Tampa didn't want to use Hogan. They didn't like him, didn't want him around. Mike Graham was a little short guy, a small guy, and a lot of guys in Tampa were smaller guys. And Mike Graham, of course, his daddy was a promoter. He wanted to be the giant killer, and he was intimidated by a guy like Hogan, 6'6", solid 300-pound, muscle guy. So Louis Tillett brought him up to Pensacola, and he was called Terry Boulder, and his brother that he brought along was Eddie Boulder, Brutus Beefcake.
Right.
But they came to Pensacola, had an old Dodge van that would barely run. We put them in the car. We carried them around to the towns with us. They didn't have money. They didn't have Beefcake didn't have wrestling boots. He used my wrestling boots. I would go work out with him. We would we'd go early to the matches and work out with him in the ring and teach him. He was never trained by anyone. He was trained on the road by people. People just took him along and trained him. They shared an apartment with us. They didn't have an apartment. We took our bed, our mattress, and threw it on the floor. And one of us slept on the box springs, and one slept on the mattress on the floor. That's how my relationship with Hogan was. I never asked for, help me here, help me there. When he got a big break, and he was in Minneapolis and had a big break there. David ended up going from Calgary to Minneapolis. I stayed actually in Vancouver. I went to Vancouver. I stayed there. David went to Minneapolis and did very well with Hogan, and then went on to the WWF the first year with Hogan. I didn't. I never called and said, look, David, help me. You want to talk to Hogan? Bring me in. None of that. I always wanted to make it in the wrestling business on my own merits, on my own talent, on my own abilities, without having to say, hey, you owe me. I helped you. Pay me back. That was not the case. And I never did that. So when the opportunity came for me to go to the WWF, Hogan was instrumental in that because they came to Calgary. I was there. I worked on the show that night in Calgary. He talked to me. He said, hey, man, what have you been doing? Why don't you come over and come with us? Blah, blah, blah. David, he messed up. He slapped this guy. They had to fire him. And David went nuts. I said, well, I don't know. You think I could do good there? I mean, can I make any money there? Man, you make more than you ever made in your life. Come on, brother, you got to come here. So, I went. I never asked for anything from him while I was there. I went to the WCW because, hey, brother, come on, you got to help me in the WCW. I went there with no contract, with nothing. Didn't ask for anything. Then, Bischoff was the one that promised a contract. And when it came down to do the job for Johnny B. Bad on national TV, well, I'm not doing the job for anyone unless I have the same kind of a deal that everyone else has. Bischoff didn't want to go for it, and Hogan turned his back on me. Hey, brother, I can't help you. Well, if he couldn't help me, then nobody can. So
I was going to ask you about that later, but
no, I can get into that more.
Okay,
He's an old bald-headed son of a bitch.
So actually, Hogan's whole personality has changed over the years.
Yeah, he somewhat opportunist. That's what they call him. Opportunist. What can you do for me now? And if you can't help me now, or if you can't do something for me tomorrow, then I don't need you today. Probably picked that up from Vince, from being around McMahon, because the times that I knew him prior to him being around McMahon so much, he wasn't like that. I think he probably picked that up. He was with McMahon right beside him, around him all the time for 6 or 8 years. And most of the guys that have been around, Shawn Michaels, Helmsley now, probably it's happened to The Rock. I hear his attitudes change. Austin, Bret Hart, all those guys that were around McMahon, Savage, all the time like that, they turned out to try to be the same way. I don't know how he talks to them or what he does, what kind of mind control he has to make guys think that they should go out then and treat their partners or their friends or their compatriots in this business the way that some of those guys have done. We're not asking for a handout from anyone. This business is created on guys who was. If I started with Kevin Sullivan, he ended up being a booker in the Mid-South Territory, and then his friend was Ted DiBiase and the Junkyard Dog and Parl Arndolf and the Honky Tonk Man and Jimmy Hart. Then when he got to be the booker, he brought his whole crew into that territory. It's much what I said earlier about Robert Fuller. When he was booking in Memphis, he took his whole crew, which was Joe LeDuc, Fuji Tanaka, the Mongolian Stomper, and his brother, and Jimmy Golden. And they all left as a group and went away. Each booker always had his group of guys he always brought in to wherever he went. And for some reason, Hogan never tried to keep his group together. And consequently, we've talked about this, myself, Greg Valentine, Jimmy Hart, a bunch of us. His downfall in the WCW was the fact that he never kept his group together that could solidify his power. Because when you're grouped together like that, you are a very powerful force. You're a union within a non-union organization, because if the booker gets fired, normally all his friends that he brought in get fired too. But if the booker gets a new job, he brings all those people with him. Hogan only carried one guy with him, and that was, of course, Beefcake all the way through. Consequently, when the power struggles in the WCW that Hogan thought he could do on his own from just being educated through McMahon, it didn't work that way. There was too many forces pulling against him. But if he would have had the Greg Valentine, the Honky Tonk Man, the Superfly Snooker, the Bushwhackers, and Jimmy Hart, and all these people together as a group with him, that he, in the beginning, that's what he said he wanted. He wanted to make an impact, and he needed help, and he wanted to come into the WCW to make an impact and get away from that four horsemen, the Ric Flair. Believe me, Ric Flair has always had his group with him. It's the Arn Anderson and whoever else that he has around, the Barry Windhams, that has always been around Flair. When Flair was a booker, if Flair's got control, he had his group. Believe me. And that group fought against Hogan. Hogan was by himself. Well, Hogan's a big, powerful guy in our business, in our industry, but there's some things that you can't overcome. And that's the one thing he did. He didn't keep his group together. He isolated all of us, and we all feel the same way about him. He was the guy who could have said, look, Eric, you promised Honky Tonk Man a contract. He came here for me. I never called WCW. All he had to say was, Eric, give the guy a contract. You promised him a contract. Give him a... I didn't ask for a dollar figure on the contract. I need to know if I'm going to have a job tomorrow.
Right.
That's all I was asking. But if a guy can't stick for you on something like that, then he's not really with you. He's not really with you. So that's how I feel about it. I'll see him somewhere someday.
Right.
Somewhere, somehow, someday. You always cross paths with a guy.
Watch thousands of exclusive shoot interviews right now on TitleMatchNetwork.com.